today. We'll probably take one break at some point in the afternoon. Oh, sure. No, I really will try to. I couldn't find a logical break point. Sometimes the estimates work and sometimes they don't. Item number 8.
Yes, this item will be handled by Christopher Stevens, and I see Darren Polhemus is with him. And they're going to talk about the Crescent City request to amend the terms of their loan with the State Revolving Fund.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Marcus, members of the board. Christopher Stevens with the Division of Financial Assistance, and also have Ann Hartridge here as well as Darren. And as Tom indicated, item 8 is a request to modify the terms of the Clean Water SWRF financing agreement with the City of Crescent City. Just by way of background, the city's finance agreement was originally approved, executed in February of 2008. It was a loan for approximately $43.8 million at an interest rate of 2.4%. It had a term of 20 years at that point. Shortly after that was executed, the division did receive from EPA approval to do extended term financing. So at the city's request, we amended that agreement to extend the term to 30 years. Excuse me. The funding originally was used to upgrade the city's treatment plant to meet BOD limits and address a cease and desist order that was in place at that time. Construction of the project was completed in August of 2010. The city made full payments on time for 2011, 2012, and 2013. However, in November of 2013, they alerted us that they wouldn't be able to make a full payment for 2014. And in fact, they made a partial payment in August of 2014. In January of this year, they formally requested a loan modification. They requested several things: a rate adjustment from the 2.4% interest rate to 0, retroactive to the origination of the loan. Excuse me. Application of all past interest payments to loan principal, forgiveness of 50% of the loan balance, and approval of approximately $36 million in additional financing for the wastewater treatment plant over the next 10 years. As you can imagine, since that time, we've had a number of discussions and analyses between the division and the city. I won't go into detail, but I did want to highlight one thing that we did do as part of that process. We did ask Clifton Larson Allen, which is the auditor that audits the financial statements for the Clean Water SWRF yearly, to go in and do an independent financial review of the city's finances. And you know, they confirmed that the city's sewer finances are in difficulties. They're having difficulties with that. They did not have enough revenue to cover their current costs, and the general fund is not capable of providing additional support to the sewer fund. Also did want to highlight the fact that the city is a small, severely disadvantaged community. Their community median household income is approximately 49% of the statewide median household income. So as a result of those discussions back and forth between us and the city, we've come to basically two proposals that are really very similar to each other. The division had offered to take an item to the board to reduce the interest rate to 0% for the remaining 26 payments. That would reduce the annual payment by approximately $520,000 to about $1.6 million. The city's counter proposal to that is very similar, to also reduce the interest rate to 0%, but what they would like to see is a graduated payment over the first 5 years, starting with a payment next year of $1.1 million, then increasing to approximately $1.7 million in 2021. They will need to raise rates, and they believe that doing that over a progressive period will make it easier for them to obtain voter approval and therefore reduce the possibility of loan default. Staff recommends that the board approve the city's proposal. I think it's very close to the division's proposal. So the proposal would be to reduce interest rate from here on out to 0% and have that graduated payment. Authorize the deputy director of the division to modify those payments, just so long as in the end all of the principal on the loan is collected. Did want to also note that there were 4 comment letters that were submitted for this item. All 4 of them supported the staff recommendation. So I'll be more than happy to answer questions. I understand that there are some representatives from the city here that would like to speak to you as well.
Real quickly, Mr. Stevens, to give folks a sense of the request, how novel the request is from the city, or in terms of our track record. Certainly, we want to work with our partners for clean water at the local level, and whether you're a disadvantaged community or not. But this graduated payment schedule, is this a tool that we've used in the Clean Water SRF program before?
Well, we certainly have on several occasions, 3 or 4 occasions, adjusted individual payments. Nothing exactly like a stepped-up payment, but certainly we have for other communities. Soledad comes to mind, where we did adjust payments for 2 or 3 years in order for them to get back on their feet, make other changes to their finances. So it's not unprecedented.
And that's fine. I mean, I appreciate creativity, whether it's precedented or not, if it makes sense. But thank you. And then I just want to get a sense of, we were talking about, over the course of the 26 years, there's a certain amount of interest payments we won't receive into our fund, and as the bank for clean water, in some ways. And okay, there's that aspect, the millions of dollars we won't receive. But how does that affect our day-to-day operations, maybe vis-a-vis helping out other disadvantaged communities? I mean, is it an incremental reduction in our available funding for disadvantaged communities?
Well, it's not going to directly affect disadvantaged communities. It will certainly affect the earnings of the fund. And so just to kind of put that into perspective, on this particular loan, what the board would be doing is foregoing about $15 million in interest over the next 26 years. So currently, our earnings are approximately $50 million in interest payments per year. So that's obviously going to grow over time. So the board is foregoing 15 divided by 25, probably $700,000 or $800,000 average over the next 26 years, that then won't be available to loan to somebody else, whether that's a disadvantaged community or somebody else.
Right, and put that in context. Your report to us earlier this month, there was some $576 million awarded through the SRF in the last year. Correct. So 800,000 versus 576 million. It's not a huge dent. Anyway, so thanks for the discussion. That's all of my questions.
Board Member Moore, this is Darren Polhemus, Deputy Director. I should just put a fine point on your question there. Christopher is correct in his answer about, in a general sense. In a very specific sense, this loan's interest rate was targeted for our small community grant fund. We swap loans, interest in and out, and this was one of the ones that was contributing to the small community grant. So in a small way, it was contributing to that. Of course, we can replace that with another loan, and we'll look to do that in the future. So in the big sense, it shouldn't really make an effect. But I just want to make sure the record was very clear that this one, in a very small sense, does. For an exact sense.
Yeah, it wasn't getting washed out into the big reservoir. Right. It was kind of targeted toward a disadvantaged community fund. Yeah,
this is one of the ones we had converted the interest rate over to go to that fund, but we'll look for a replacement to try to replace.
We'll look for other opportunities.
Yeah, and I should add one other thing. Christopher also mentioned that we hadn't done the modified terms, the graduated payments, and we've really stuck to that principle, largely because we get asked all the time from folks that should know better, that come in and say, I'd like to have a low payment now, and 15 years from now, could you give me some balloon payments? And it's like, well, looks like you're about ready to retire in 5, so you're passing it off the buck. And no, the answer is pretty clear. Yeah. This is a very specific case. We weighed this one very, very specifically, tied it to their need to do a graduated fee increase, and so I think it represents a special case, a case that warrants approval in this particular instance. It's certainly, anybody listening to this should not get the feel that somehow we're now jumping to graduated payment schedules, because you pretty much wouldn't want to be in Crescent City's position that they're working their way out of right now in order to get this kind of special dispensation. So,
Thank you very much for that clarification. It's very important for our AAA rating, right,
That's
Chair
right.
Marcus? Yeah. Thank you.
Question? All right, let's go to comment. I have three cards that are clipped together. I don't know if you want to come up together or in order, and then I have another card, so there are four total. The first is Richard Hawley from City Council, City of Crescent City. Thank you for joining us. And that'll be followed. He'll be followed by Bob Black, City Attorney.
Thank you and good afternoon, Chair Marcos and Board. My name is Rick Hawley. I am a City Council member of the City of Crescent City, and I was also mayor for the last year. On behalf of the City of Crescent City and the extended community of Del Norte County, I want to thank the Board for considering our request for a modification of our wastewater treatment treatment facility loan. With that in mind, then, we've traveled from Crescent City, and I'd like to just introduce our team that have been working with your staff.
Sure.
And some of whom will give a short presentation, and will certainly be available for questions. First, City Manager Gene Palazzo is here. City Attorney Bob Black. City Public Works Director Eric Weir.
How
City
aptly named.
Pardon? Pardon?
Spelled wrong.
Oh, it's spelled wrong. Okay.
Yeah, no.
The Weir, yeah, get it?
Sorry, I
Weir.
used to run a public works department. It's just one of
Oh,
those
okay.
things.
City Finance Director Emily Boyd. And also, we have Susan Mayer, who is our interim finance director, who had particular expertise in this area because she worked with us, and so we hired her as a consultant during this process. So I would also like to say that we very much appreciate the positive working relationship that's evolved between our staff and your staff over the last year. This is a critically important issue for Crescent City, and we gratefully find ourselves kind of on both the same side of a solution. We agree, obviously, with the staff's recommendation, and I would respectfully direct the board to the letters that have been provided that we only sought over the last week since the recommendation came to our attention, and those were from Senator Jim Nielsen, Congressman Jared Huffman, Senate-elect Mike McGuire. I can't read my own writing. Crescent City Harbor Commission, Del Norte Chamber of Commerce, and Baird Rumiano, who's the owner of Rumiano Cheese, which is the largest industrial user of our sewer. So with those things said, I would like to, if it's okay, turn it over to Mr. Black, who'll tell you a little bit about the history and a little bit more detail than you've received so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Chair Marcus, members, I'm here to make a few brief remarks and just to let you know that all of us are going to be brief, but we're here to act as a resource and answer any questions that you have. And I think, like all of us, I think it's particularly important to mention what a great pleasure it has been for the city to work with your staff. They have, I think, analyzed their proposal that's now before you very, very thoroughly. They kind of put us through the ringer, but we're happy to come out the other side on the same side as your staff. This story probably has a number of beginning points, but really 2007 is when the city decided that it really had to confront the need to improve its sewer plant to deal with the cease and desist order that had been outstanding for over a decade at that point. But unfortunately, 2007 was kind of a year of a perfect storm to undertake a project like this. The Supreme Court had just decided in the Bighorn case that utility fees were going to be subject to Prop 218. The construction cost curve over the preceding couple of years was just steadily increasing, and there was no real indication that we were going to have a big recession happening in the fall of that year. So in the spring of 2007, the city was confronted with those things and had a sewer treatment infrastructure that had been effectively disinvested over the course of about 30 years. We had successive city leadership that had decided to keep rates artificially low and basically not put any money of any significance into the plant from about the late 70s. We had a small disadvantaged community that was not used to significant utility rates and was not prepared and quite frankly, because of its economic structure, was not really capable of easily bearing the kind of rate increase that was needed to pay back this loan. We did impose over the course of the last 7 years an 80% rate increase over what the rates had been in 2007. And now we find ourselves at the point where we have to ask for additional relief. And of course, the original loan was a form of relief in itself because it was a subsidized interest rate 30-year program. So where we are today is we are determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. We have a city leadership that has, over the last 7 years, endured 2 Prop 218 processes, 2 referenda that did not succeed, 1 initiative that had to be kept off the ballot by court action, 3 lawsuits, 9 recall attempts on the city council members that supported this, this program. And I think the evidence is there that this city leadership and the current city council, and hopefully city councils going forward, we keep our fingers crossed, is dedicated to bringing best practices to bear on the city of Crescent City and not find ourselves again in a scenario where we have to do a major financing and ask for a 70% rate increase, 75% rate increase in one stroke. With that, I'd like to introduce Eric Weir. He is the City Public Works Director, and he can tell you a bit more about the city's plans to maintain and improve the system going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Good afternoon, Chair Marcus, members of the board. As Mr. Black said, my name is Eric Weir. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Crescent City. As such, it's my department's responsibility to effectively maintain and manage the collection system and the wastewater treatment plant. So first, I'd like to thank the board for their previous partnership with the city that allowed us to construct stage 1 of our facility plan to meet our current NPDES permit and to have the water quality that we need in our pristine area. But what's before you tonight is not just a plan that tries to address one past project. It's a plan that tries to address all of the aspects within our sewer collection system. So it's not just about debt service, it's about the operations and maintenance, it's about the future major maintenance repairs we need to do, the future capital improvements we need to do. When you talk about O&M costs, especially for our area, it's a little bit different than it is in most areas. Our treatment plant is located within the coastal zone. So we don't have a large area or a large footprint. Our community is located in a corner of the state in which we're very fortunate to have the Redwood National Park, state natural parks, beautiful coastlines and beaches. But when you talk about treatment plants, one thing that makes a treatment plant more affordable is to have a treatment process that uses large areas. You know, that you might have acres of ponds and, you know, drying fields and whatnot that it takes to operate and maintain a treatment plant. We don't have that luxury. Our treatment plant is located on just over an acre of land. So what we had to do is we had to keep our footprint small. So we had to rely on technology. So the technology that we used in this project was an MBR. So that's allowing us to create a high level of effluent to meet our water quality permit and to discharge into the pristine ocean right by the lighthouse. So when we talk about O&M, we talk about a higher level of O&M because it's not a large land application. This is a technology-based application. We're also right on the coast. We have harsh weather, salt air, beating constantly on our treatment plant processes and the equipment that we have there. So we need to not only think about the past project and the debt service, which is what's before you tonight, but also into the future. You know, what are we going to do to make sure that we have the proper funds so that we can maintain this? Because this was a significant investment, not only for the board, but also for our community and our ratepayers. So we need to do what we can do to try to maintain this so as long as we can, to do the preventive maintenance that we need to do. We have put together an extensive capital improvement plan into the future because this was just stage 1. Let's just address the water quality. There's still other aspects of this plant. As you well know, treatment plants are not one project and done. They're living projects. They're constantly evolving. And if you're not thinking about the next project, then really you're not doing your community the service that it needs to be done to properly manage what you're trying to manage and operate and maintain. So to do this, we're not only looking towards the board, we've also, looked towards the community as, as partners in this whole thing. We're all in this together, and so I appreciate the board's consideration in this partnership. We also have aggressively looked at grants and been very successful recently upon attaining grants to try to fund some of these capital improvement projects. We're also looking towards the community to try to be as innovative as we can in other partnerships to try to look towards new innovations in technology to reuse energy, upgrade our efficiencies so that we can cost effectively maintain our treatment plant as best we can. So with the board's action today, what this allows us to do is put ourselves in a situation where we can not only address the past project, but it also puts us in a situation where we can now look towards the future and do what we need to do so we can operate and maintain this plant for the longevity. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And you will be around if we have questions. I think I'll take the next card, if you don't mind. Linda Sutter, Crescent City and Del Norte Taxpayers Association.
Good afternoon. I'm Linda Sutter, and I'm the secretary of the Crescent City Del Norte County Taxpayer Association. I'd like to point out that I drove here from Crescent City while the 5 members of the city staff flew here, stayed in hotels, eating out, arranged transportation, all at the expense of the taxpayers. They do not manage our money frugally, and that is why I'm here today. Currently, the city of Crescent City is in default on their state revolving fund loan, which is $43.8 million for the wastewater treatment plant and the state-of-the-art laboratory that they included in that price. It only took 3 short years to reach this point, and it was predicted. It was predicted because, according to the 2010 census and demographics of Crescent City, there's a total population of 7,643. 3,500 are incarcerated at Pelican Bay State Prison. 53% of the population live in households, 46.5 live at Pelican Bay. 33.7% of families are below poverty level. The prison annexed with the city of Crescent City in the 90s and have their own sewer system. Crescent City Council members were able to successfully apply for a $43.8 million loan to be paid back by a population of 4,123, or 3,700 ratepayers, in which 33.7 of that number falls below poverty level. The tax-paying and rate-paying citizens of Crescent City and Del Norte County consider the board negligent and culpable. We fail to understand why this city council was allowed to process a $43.8 million loan that was twice what the ratepayer could afford, and therefore hold you equally responsible. We blame the board for acting negligently for failure to conduct due diligence in the loan process. This type of behavior is similar behavior demonstrated in the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and Savings and Loans, which placed our national economy in ruins. Additionally, the appearance of this board is deliberate indifference. It is a deliberate indifference because the board is aware that it will be impossible for the city to repay the loan on the backs of 3,700 ratepayers. What this board should consider is extending the loan for 50 years with or without interest, keeping the current sewer rates and not increasing those rates 5% annually for the next 4 years. Not only would the loan be paid off in 43 years or less, money would accrue that would benefit the sewer plant for replacement or equipment or failed equipment. It should be noted that the City Council of Crescent City just voted in an ordinance for delinquent sewer charges to be placed as a special assessment against parcels of property as a tax. We believe this is illegal. Further, it is the intent of the city to raise sewer rates 5% for the next 4 years, and adding on to that a cost of living raise. This will undoubtedly fail and bankruptcy will ultimately occur. Currently, there are great disparities between ratepayers and businesses, which could be a reason why the city is unable to make their SRF payments in a timely fashion. An example of this is the Price Mall, which is located in the downtown area. They have several businesses within one complex and are only charged $80 a month for the entire complex for a sewer rate. Understandably, the city only assesses their sewer rate according to the amount of water they use, which is not only causing a loss in revenue towards collection of sewer rates, but the businesses are failing to pay their fair share. This behavior is condoned by our city leaders. We, the Crescent City and Delaware County taxpayers, understand it is your decision what you plan to do. We also understand approximately 6 cities in the state of California have filed for bankruptcy. One city was the city of Los Ojos, who filed bankruptcy on their sewer plant. We don't want to go down that road. We believe that you have the power to make our situation unique and bearable by extending the loan to 50 years, where the rates remain affordable for these users. Thank you.
Thank you. Debbie, you all are my impression has been very conservative and thoughtful and professional about figuring this all out. So I'm assuming, but please elaborate, how you did the analysis on the doability of this in the beginning and now.
Well, that's a very broad question, and it gets into the financial statements of the sewer fund and what they could reasonably afford. And I think it will take a combination of raising rates and cutting costs for the city to be able to make those payments. And as for the suggestion that we could extend the loan to 50 years, we have no authority to do that.
Yeah, I know we just got authority to do 30 years.
So we're kind of
last year.
boxed into, certain parameters that we have no control over. And there are really two sides to this coin, how much you collect and how much you spend. Just as any other person or business has a budget, and those are the parameters that they're faced with. And so we looked at the numbers, and we believe that by reducing the interest rate to 0 and then some moderate increases in their sewer rate, and keeping an eye on their pennies and nickels, that they will be able to make that payment in the future.
I guess I would emphasize too what Mr. Black said is that I remember I was assistant deputy director in DFA right before 2007, 2006, 2005. People forget that the construction inflation rate was about 6% annually, and the cost of living index increase around that time was only 3%. So construction costs were escalating at twice the cost of what everything else was going up. You couldn't find steel, and people were, when you got a bidder, and in case of Crescent City, I believe they had one bidder that, you really thought hard about whether you wanted to turn that down, because if you went out to bid, you could get an even scarier number. We all remember what it was like at the peak of the bubble, and they had some.
No, I've rolled those dice for better.
Yeah,
or for worse.
exactly.
It's easier in hindsight. To do
Exactly.
what you
That's
should
what
do
I wanted to
at the time.
emphasize is that hindsight on this project makes it a lot easier analysis of what we should have done, and if you'd waited a couple years, it'd have been a lot different story. But trying to pick those timings, just like time in the market, is always tricky when you're sitting in the seat looking forward from here. We've also modified some of our procedures on when we look at this, and so we used to allow the cities to make their own decision on whether to increase at a certain amount, and the policy's been changed such that we're involved in that now to try to prevent something like this in the future if we are so inclined to face a similar scenario. But it is going to be a very difficult climb, but I think the city's committed to that. They've expressed that commitment, and they're going to need our partnership going forward, because it's not over just by this. As you know, they have to do a rate increase, and we'll probably have to help them with information associated with what our charges are and how their overall structure is, and we're committed to try to help them through that.
Right, as well as helping them with grants to the extent we can with
Yeah.
others.
And that's an important point, that we're kind of meeting each other halfway in some regard. We're being creative with how the repayment schedule is set up, the 0 interest rate going forward, and then they're coming forward with a commitment to work with their constituents to successfully raise sewer rates 5% over 5 years. In the event that they're not successful, you know, what measures are we able to take in terms of making up the gap?
Well, we're, at this point now, we're basically, you know, at 0%. It's interest only. I'd probably rather not discuss what the alternatives are. They involve probably,
And it doesn't, we don't really have the ability to withdraw our if we approve this modification, we don't really have the ability to withdraw it. It's not a condition, it's
no.
conditional. So to condition this
Which-
financial package on the voters approving sewer rates, we have limited ability to condition.
Right, right. And as you note, and by the resolution before you, you're granting me ability to do some fine adjustment. We're not locking in what the floating schedule's going to be, assuming that we might need to make some minor adjustments, but I can say that the intent is to stick very close to this. But if we see that, you know, a slight adjustment would be beneficial to them as well as us, then you're granting me that authority through the resolution to make that adjustment on the payment scheduling, but that's pretty much it.
I'm just seeing that we're accepting a fair measure of risk at
Correct.
Clean Water SRF on behalf of the city of Crescent City and its residents.
Right, and certainly we have, you know, our last desire is to force someone into default over one of our loans when we're trying to accomplish a joint mission of water quality and improvement for the people of Crescent City as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any questions? All right. If there are no other questions, is there a motion?
So moved to adopt the resolution, the proposed resolution.
Yep.
That's mine.
I second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Carries. Thank you all very much. Cross our fingers there. All right. Mr. Howard, item number 9.
Yes, item number 9 is continuing action of the board, looking at the NPDES system cost of compliance. And in a previous resolution, the board asked us to come back and tell what progress we were making. Phil Iserino will be presenting the staff report.
Yeah, I'm sorry Tam's not here, but I think we need to keep moving forward. We have a very hefty agenda, and now we have folks we have big ones, yes, so.
And if you can do it in less than 30 minutes, that would be fabulous.
That's right.
I'll do better than that. I'll do it in 5. Good afternoon, Chair Marcus and members of the board. I've been directed to keep my presentation short, so I'll do that. Did I turn it up? Resolve 4, or action item 4 of resolution 2013-0029, or the cost of compliance resolution, directs water board staff to work with the NPDES wastewater roundtable and stakeholders to document existing practices that will help identify steps to ensure a transparent, consistent, and efficient permitting process. Resolve action item 4, or resolve 4, or action item 4, also required staff to report to the State Water Board by September 10, 2014 on these steps and processes. The Executive Director reported to you in September that staff and stakeholders have jointly prepared a report per the resolution, and that staff would present the report as an informational item at the board meeting in October. Obviously, I didn't make it to any of the October meetings. That's why I'm here before you today. In accordance with the cost of compliance resolution, I formed a subcommittee of staff members from the State Water Board and 5 regional water boards to address the NPDES cost of compliance in coordination with the stakeholders. The report before you is a product of the coordination between the subcommittee and the stakeholders. If you approve the report recommendations today, the subcommittee will continue to work with the stakeholders in implementing the recommendations, as well as any directions you may give me today to address the cost of compliance with NPDES permits. Yeah. At this point, I'd like to ask the board members if you want me to go over the report recommendations, or if you prefer that I, along with Diana Messina and Marley Wood, answer any questions you may have about the report instead.
I think if you went over them very quickly, I think that's always better for people listening. There are the people who came to hear this, but there's also just the public policy import of doing it. But if you can do it quickly, that would be good.
I'll do that. The subcommittee and stakeholders have agreed to develop guidelines and procedures that address the following areas as shown on the slide. On item 1, the San Diego and San Francisco Bay Water Boards are already conducting regional monitoring in their regions. The Central Valley Water Board also has embarked on a similar regional monitoring effort. We can emulate what is being done in these regions and apply it statewide as appropriate. Thus, staff will work with the subcommittee and the stakeholders and US EPA as well towards this end. The second item is targeted for dischargers that have shown consistent compliance with their permits. This approach is already included in statewide NPDES general permits. Surrogate monitoring is appropriate where a constituent that can be easily and inexpensively analyzed is substituted for a constituent that is more costly and more difficult to analyze. For example, turbidity may be substituted for total suspended solids, or fecal coliform may be substituted for total coliform. Staff will work with the subcommittee and stakeholders so that we can put instructions in water board guidance and permit writing training materials to guide permit writers in using developed approaches for monitoring frequency reduction and surrogate monitoring. State Water Board staff consistently provide training for permit writers. Last year, staff conducted permit writer training on the state implementation policy for toxics control and the use of the standardized NPDES permit templates. However, we did not cover water effect ratios, translators, and mixing zones during our training. Thus, staff will work with the subcommittee and the stakeholders and US EPA to develop training classes that will cover these topics. In addition, staff will also work with the subcommittee and stakeholders to develop guidance or provide clarification of regulation that will inform the regional water boards on the appropriate use of water effect ratios, translators, mixing zones, performance-based goals, or performance-based limits. I can never figure this out. I'm going. On item 8, regional water board staff should work with the discharger during each individual permit reissuance process in order to determine which reports may be submitted through a coalition, association, or regional effort. Staff, again, will work with the subcommittee and the stakeholders to identify when alternatives to submission of reports are appropriate. Staff will continue conducting internal water board cross-training among NPDES permit writers and planning staff to ensure that plans and policies include example permit language that permit writers can use in their permits. Staff will also work with the subcommittee and stakeholders to develop procedures for permit writers to coordinate with planning standards and TMDL staff to ensure that TMDLs can be clearly implemented in permits. Staff action. There we go. Staff action on, I think I'm missing a slide here. Sorry about that. The State Water Board has adopted several general permits and will be considering adoption today of the drinking water systems general permit after this item. The WQ staff are also working or coordinating with stakeholders in developing a general permit for hydrostatic test water discharges. Similarly, the regional water boards are developing general permits for discharges with similar characteristics. Thus, we're already implementing this recommendation that's shown on the slide as item 11. That concludes my presentation. I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Questions before we go to comment?
Thank you. Thank you for following up on this item, and thank you for working to bring this back to the board. Through the subcommittee, through working with stakeholders, have you prioritized these 11 recommendations and developed some estimated time frame as to how and when they would be accomplished and what sort of resources would be needed in order to accomplish them? I mean, there are great recommendations. I can't imagine that they could be done without significant investment of time and resources, particularly from the regional water boards and the roundtable. So hence my questions about prioritization and timing.
That's an excellent question. In the time that we had to form the subcommittee and draft our staff report, also run the staff report by the stakeholders and several back and forth, we didn't have time to prioritize the different recommendations that are presented in the report. So what I would like to ask the board today is give me time to convene the subcommittee and the stakeholders so we can sit down and prioritize the tasks that are recommended in the report and get back to you in 6 months with our prioritization as long as with the timelines to complete the actions that are presented in the report.
Well, I think providing that time for you to coordinate and come back to us is reasonable. I think 6 months is a bit long.
Yeah, 6 months you'd want to prioritize
Yes.
and already be in action. So the question I would have, and I'll direct it to Tam, but really to any of the rest of you, is do you want the team, I mean, you're asking for general support from us of where you are.
Right.
And then the next thing would be, do we need, I would suggest it was just prioritization and coming back, that you come back a lot sooner before
Yes.
you dig into anything.
Okay.
And that way we can have a more,
I agree.
so does that work?
That will work. Yes, I'm asking for your blessing on our recommendations. And yes, I'll come back a lot sooner than 6 months to give you our prioritization as well as some estimates of when the actions will be completed.
Well, let me
Go ahead.
let me pile it on.
Refine that. Yeah.
I certainly am supportive of these recommendations, and I certainly support directing staff to work with the roundtable, the subcommittee, the stakeholders to come back to us with their prioritization. But in addition to the prioritization, I would also like to get a rough estimate of timing. Actually, let me backtrack. In addition to prioritization, I would like an idea from staff as to how these recommendations would be developed and implemented. Would they be through informal guidance? Would they require board action? You know, what does it look like? And how much time and resources that would take? And I guess particularly from Tom Howard and Victoria Whitney, what does that mean in terms of the other priorities that the board has for the Division of Water Quality? And so I'd like to get, some sense of that as you move forward.
Absolutely. I think that's going to be part of the prioritization that we're going to do. We're going to figure out which of the actions are low-hanging fruits that we can address right away, and which are more complex issues that may require a board action, policy development or amendment, stuff like that. So, yeah, we're going to include those.
Good, because I mean, I can, and I'm sure you can tell too, that even though some of these recommendations sound very good and sound like things that we're already doing, like, for example, this number 11 in terms of general permits, I think, you know, for those of us who've been through the process with respect to the next item that will be coming before the board, it raises, I mean, even something as you know, pretty obvious as number 11, which you said we're already working on, it begs a discussion of, well, how do we determine and prioritize which general permit the state board would take on? What is that, you know, that level of significance, and what does that mean for the regional boards that are facing these issues in the meantime as the state board is going through the process of developing general permit? I think we learned from the drinking water discharge permit example that we just can't take it for granted that once the state board decides to do a general permit, regardless of how hard staff work and how motivated we are, that these things could be done, you know, in a quick manner, given the complexity of the issues involved and given the dynamics involved with regional boards and their specific local issues and concerns. So even something like this, which we can say we're already doing, I think it has much more significance in terms, again, of, you know, the decision-making process of how we go forward and do something like general permits.
Right.
Which I'm sure you recognize how challenging each of these recommendations are. So while I certainly do endorse these recommendations for now, I certainly would want more information about prioritization, what it means in terms of development, implementation, both from a resource perspective as well as from a policy perspective.
Right, doability, yeah, the low-hanging fruit you talked about, how important it is. I mean, the risk involved. I mean, you can figure out what the parameters are, but it'd be good to come back with something and suggest it, because we can all come up with great ideas all the time. We can't execute on all of them, as I think, in a timely way, which is what Board Member Dodick is talking about. So I suppose come up with a strategic prioritization, I guess, is what we're saying. Ms. Whitney? Because you have to live in the space of everything done in the division.
Unless I retire.
Don't you threaten that again.
I think that the priorities for the NPDES program over the next few months are all going to involve developing guidance through a number of different forums. We've had a permit quality review from US EPA that has led to some questions and suggestions regarding the data that we collect, which ties in very closely to a lot of this cost of compliance work, because a lot of that is related to monitoring costs. Right. And so I think one of the early items that we're going to be doing is looking at the monitoring data and trying to determine whether or not and how well it helps us answer management questions that we have. And if it's not helpful for a variety of reasons, we'll either try to make it helpful or jettison it, depending on the outcome. In addition, as I think most of you know, but probably the audience doesn't, DWQ has filed an application with GoBiz to be a project in the next cycle of their Lean Six Sigma review, which is related to looking at processes. What I envision is that, you know, the end result of all of this is going to be an update of our guidance to the regional boards, which is currently in our administrative procedures manual, but is 20 years old. So it's pretty ripe for being redone. And in regard to number 11, we have had an incredibly difficult time doing statewide general permits. You know, we've approached them two different ways.
I'm sorry, let me interrupt, Ms. Whitney, since we do have a long agenda ahead of us. I didn't mean to start a discussion on this today. Let me go ahead and request then that staff bring back this item, say, in February.
So could I make a suggestion that we think about, we periodically have board, meaning priority sessions so that we can talk more specifically about how individual priorities fit with the larger priorities. And it seems to me that it would make sense to bring this set of priorities in and then compare it with all of the other priorities that we have in a one of those priority setting things. And February would be a fine time to do that. I'm not suggesting that we delay it, but it provides us with the opportunity to talk about it in relation to the other priorities as opposed to in and of itself.
That's a different thing.
It is.
That's fine, but prioritizing within this is really important to do before then.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you're just giving us 11 good ideas.
Well,
As
But that's
opposed
what
to
I was
how
trying
would-
to avoid.
I don't want 11 good ideas. I
Oh.
want, and we could endorse the concept. We want you to do the strategic thinking
Yep.
you know
to
what, no,
prioritize
I'm
these.
gonna
But I'm
be a
also going to,
voice of
I also have
dissent.
speakers I want to hear from before we close.
Yeah, I'm going to be a voice of dissent on that a little bit. I've been listening to my fellow board members, and I think the 11 good ideas all fit within one good idea, which is a guidance approach. So I don't completely agree. I don't think we need to do a two-step process of prioritization and then fleshing out these issues. I think you've come a long way with this report I've read, and I respect what's being said, but I think these are all things we're working on anyway, and regional boards are engaged, and you've already hit the ground running. So I don't think we need to make it a two-step process. That's just my opinion.
So your suggestion is for staff to come back with not a prioritization, but a work plan on how and when these recommendations will be implemented?
Yes.
You mean do the prioritization
As
within
part of that? I'm
I don't
fine
think
with that.
one's above and if you really look at the details of these things, they're interrelated. They deal with monitoring, as you point out. They deal with just the process of justifying requirements and permits. I think you've taken a bite that's big, but you can chew it and swallow it and deal with it.
That's really not a great metaphor when I didn't get to eat lunch.
So, I caution us getting in too many stepwise processes. I think this has been great. The stakeholder input has been really valuable. Regional boards have been engaged. We're looking at continuous improvement of one of our bread and butter programs. And it is 11 points of complexity, and you take them all on. That's my opinion.
I'm fine with that. I think as part of developing this work plan, you will have to consider prioritization anyway. So if you could do that by February, that would be very
Yeah,
helpful.
there you go.
We will certainly bring back a follow-up document that provides more detail about scheduling priorities and the work that needs to be done. The exact form of it will work out, but I think we'll make it a more useful tool for the board members.
And I want to endorse Jonathan's offer, if you will, that we have a prioritization meeting of the board members soon after the first of the year, so that we can, because there's still a lot going on, too much, actually.
Yes, we
It's
will
better than not
schedule one
enough.
of those.
I don't know. But we do need to prioritize. We actually have some speakers, and I want to hear from them before I opine. Adam Link from the California Association of Sanitation Agencies.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. Thank you
Hi.
for the opportunity to speak. I just first wanted to say thank you to Phil and Diana for working with us on this. They've been working with us for the last 6 months on kind of refining the ideas and getting what were our general proposals originally in the middle of 2013 and were embodied in the resolution into this response to our report, and it kind of helped to clarify the issues and what we were seeking to get out of the process and what they were able to deliver out of the process. So that was definitely very helpful. However, saying that, there is still some work to be done, particularly with relation to implementation. I think the vetting process, if I can call it that it's been through over the last year, starting at the State Water Board, then going through the NPDES Roundtable, going through State Water Board staff, sitting down with stakeholders, I think that was very valuable just to get everybody on the same page and identify the kind of low-hanging fruit and things like that were mentioned. But it really is the next steps where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. So within the next, if it's February, if it's within the next 6 months, whether it's developing a work plan and prioritizing, which we're happy to do either offline, but really developing that next piece is what we are seeking out of the process. And I think that's where we will see, as our dischargers will see, the greatest value out of the cost of compliance effort. So the one thing that I was going to ask, and I think Board Member Dodek beat me to the punch there, was to have some kind of a timeline for implementation of these recommendations. I think we can generally support the recommendations as CASA and on behalf of the more kind of active NPDS stakeholders. But really what we want to see is how are these going to be implemented and when are they going to be implemented? Because they are good ideas, but as I said, what we want to see is the next steps in that process. And then the one thing that I also wanted to comment on was that just to make sure there was understanding that this report was only in response to action item number 4 from the resolution of last year. And so there's a number of other items related to the economic checklist, the TMDL roundtable. There's some other deadlines that are applicable to those, and we hope that those are still being worked on, and we will work on those. But this is strictly related to action item number 4 and some of our recommendations related to the NPDS roundtable and that process. So thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions or give you any additional thoughts on this.
They did mention, there is that whole action item on the TMDL, though, within this. So does that begin to address those?
There is, and that was, so when we were working back and forth, what the concern was, I didn't want it to appear that this report was the final action on that item. So it was referenced in there, but I believe it was also referenced that they're still working with the TMDL roundtable, and that portion of it is due, I believe, in March of next year. So I think that's a separate item that will be addressed separately, but is all part of the larger initiative. So, great, thank you.
Michael Garabedian, Friends of the North Fork.
Good afternoon, board members. Michael Garabedian with Friends of the North Fork. We have a lot of problems with this proposal, though I should say, first of all, any criticism of the template, the NPDES template, is well taken, and we certainly agree with that point. From the point of view of the public, needing to have something they can understand and be trained in, trained to use. A couple of kind of quick points. The public needs to be involved in these permits, and they are not effectively involved now. There's really no mechanism for them to be effectively involved. We've been involved in 2 hearings, and one I was involved in the North River plant in Manhattan, had a lot of community involvement. There's no reason there shouldn't be, and it's your fault, really, and the region's fault that there isn't.
Can you explain that, since there are so many public hearings on permits? What do you mean exactly?
Well, I'm talking about our experience with Colfax, the 2 5-year renewal permits, 2006 and 2012. We asked for a meeting in the community. People want to know about this. They're paying for this. They're actually paying for the Miller Coors outfit that's using the sewer system instead of treating before it goes in the sewer system, that shut down the system for 90 days, the first 6 months of this year, and on and on. But yes, it's very difficult to be involved. The second time around, and we've had some success, a little bit of success in these things, but the public isn't involved. If you know there are permit hearings in some region, we'd love to hear about it. That might be a good example. But as far as we know, in the Central Valley, nobody's there except us. We were then a couple hearings. And as you may recall, we suggested that that the board, as part of its annual effectiveness review, I suggested a number of criteria you could use about public involvement to measure that the public is involved. You can put numbers on this. And I made those points before. But the Clean Water Act is really not, NPDES is not really working for the public to understand or get involved. We did submit our application again on the stakeholder group. If you've seen the stakeholder group for this, it has 1 environmental group on it and dozens of dischargers. It's really a discharger group. These are recommendations from the dischargers. It'd be nice to be able to walk away today and know that we're going to be invited or told about these stakeholder meetings when they take place. The cost savings, these proposals look like deregulation to us. And just most of these proposals the existing science needs to be looked at. I don't know why there isn't. I mean, there's indicators, for instance. I mean, there's plenty of science, a lot of science that the indicators are not doing what they're supposed to do. and adopting a bunch of others without the scientific background or even knowing that criticism of existing indicators is a serious problem. And I guess I'd sum up those opening points just by saying that you know, is public input a cost that you're trying to eliminate, or is it already eliminated? To us, it's already eliminated. And so if you're going to have more public involvement, is that a cost that the dischargers want to avoid? They're used to avoiding it. On the ambient monitoring, we are not San Francisco Bay. We are not San Diego Bay, and these kind of arid areas. This suggestion that we can learn from examples is great variation in areas and up and down our own valley, and in terms of where sewer plants are located. Right. The one we work on, Colfax, it discharges into a ravine that's dry most of the year, for instance. In terms of ambient and decreasing the monitoring on good behavior, every POTW is different. There's just no way to lump them all together and rely solely on these ambient readings. And I mentioned the indicator problem. There's the simulation effort to do something and make more use of assimilation. And a question we have is what's being done in the drought now, the reliance on different kinds of assimilation or mixing zones, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever's being done, is the board looking at the permits right now in the drought to see that that the water that's being relied on to do the assimilation is even there?
Whether the assimilative capacity is effective.
Exactly. General permits, cost benefit. The people in the community need to know their sewer plant. The more general the permits are, the harder it is to get involved. Not having community meetings from the board and stuff is a real need and problem. And they can get to know it. Well, this really, to us, this goes too far. It will be good to have an opportunity to get involved in the stakeholder group. The stakeholder group really needs to be expanded to include the public and other environmental groups, and we've suggested that you have protocols for stakeholder groups so they aren't basically discharger groups. And we look forward to trying to follow this issue and believe that actually the board, you should take more active role in this process. Take some of it back and make sure that it meets what we need, and that, for goodness sake, that we have a NPDES program that works for the public and the public is involved in.
I'm sorry, I just have to comment that every NPDES permit that we adopt is adopted at a public meeting in a public forum. And I understand and agree that we can always do better at outreaching to make sure people know about it, but it's not that we never adopt a permit without having a public hearing.
That's not the point at all. It has nothing, very little to do with what I'm talking about. The process of getting involved in the public hearing and understanding a permit, being able to be effectively involved in it, is something that needs training. The training this morning, I thank you for, it was excellent. Well, why isn't the public getting training in the NPDES process and the different parts of a permit?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'll take that as a suggestion. I mean, you've raised it before, and it is obviously public participation is important to, I think, all of us individually, but us collectively. And part of the issue of the prioritization conversation we had is there are a million good ideas, and we don't have the resources or time to do all of them. And so that's partially why even I think these recommendations are good in spirit, but they also lead to being able to read a lot into them without more specifics. And so there are going to be fears that it's opening the door, or I didn't read deregulation into it, but I could see how you could. I think the whole point of the cost of compliance effort is trying to figure out and think about the basic ground rules is, can we do the regulation that we are doing with the same or better effectiveness for less cost? and less burden and less time spent, because then we can spend more of our resources on the most important things. So for example, as we look at trying to do region-wide monitoring, that's going to start telling us, is it making a difference? What's the real problem in this water body versus taking the narrow, outfall by outfall approach, which gets you a bunch of information but doesn't tell you a lot. It does help you with, is someone meeting their permit requirements, but sometimes those requirements are redundant, repetitive, and those resources could be better used in a more regionalized way where you could achieve the same end. So that's part of the conversation that needs to happen. I do think we need to, that's part of why I do want us to bring this back here rather than it just being in our priority discussion, because I do think we need to be able to articulate it better and clear it out. And I do think we do need, I remember we had a conversation about this, stakeholder engagement that is broader than dischargers. And so I think we have to have a conversation about that as well, as opposed to this being the main place. I know that folks have problems being able to come. We had an open door on it, and there are a lot of meetings, and people just can't come. But I would love it if you'd do a follow-up with Mr. Garabedian on it so we can be focused, but also give a general, because it's not going to do anything. If we keep doing, the intent of all of this is fantastic from my perspective, but we're going to miss a beat if we just make a small group happy and we're not explaining what we're doing to the public, because this is all in the interest of being able to do more environmental good, not less.
Well, in closing, we need help with the Colfax permit process, and we don't see any help in this proposal at all, except perhaps when it comes to you revising the template, which is a serious need.
Okay.
Thank you.
Diana, you want to speak to the stakeholder process?
Yes, may I?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Okay, Diana Messina, Supervising Engineer with Division Water Quality. Mr. Garabedian had a couple very good points. And so with my experience with NPDES program and the policy itself, if there is one underlining foundational issue, is taking the time to explain to the permittees and the interested parties and the community being regulated what an NPDES permit is, what the Clean Water Act is, and the responsibility. And so I'm very familiar with the Colfax situation from the past few years, and that is a situation with small communities as well as large communities. Just as a water board, we do need to work with the discharger and put together some kind of public forums just to educate the basics. Because once everyone understands just the regulatory basics, there's much more understanding then on the requirements and which ones are meaningful and which ones are not. So I do agree with the speaker.
Right. So I count on you all to come up with some appropriate follow-up there as well.
Is there an opportunity to work with Office of Public Participation on this? Yeah. Thank you.
All right, another card. Sean Bothwell, California Coastkeeper Alliance.
Good afternoon, Chair, board members. My name is Sean Bothwell. I'm the staff attorney for the California Coastkeeper Alliance. On this item, I'm going to actually be speaking for our executive director, Sarah, who can't be here today, but has worked in the past with the roundtable and board members on this issue. And as we have relayed several times before when it comes to this cost compliance discussion, we've always urged the board, when you're weighing any potential savings from this cost of compliance program, to really consider the weigh that against the cost of non-compliance. For example, this idea of unnecessary monitoring, quote, unnecessary monitoring. With that comes the possibility that you're decreasing the likelihood of detecting water quality exceedances, which comes with its own financial cost, has cost to the public health and environmental costs as well. And so I wanted to second the suggestion of making this effort a little more collaborative and consulting with California Coastkeeper Alliance and some of the other NGOs. We have felt that not the NPDES permits, but this cost of compliance program has been very discharger-led and has been frustrating for us to be able to engage and have our voices heard. So,
but hasn't the frustration been that you just haven't had time to go to all the meetings? It's a resource issue as opposed to how it felt in the meetings?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the initial meetings, yeah, we felt like it was a discharge-led discussion, and our voice didn't hold much weight in the process. And that's really it. I wanted to respond to one point regarding this idea of the monitoring regionally based on local, and I understand that idea that by looking at the big picture, you can see whether you're really making a program. But the individual permits, the monitoring on them matter too. I mean, you get to see the effectiveness of individual BMPs.
No, that's right. It's
the
not
available
either or.
technology.
I was talking both and.
That's right.
But making space for both and.
Okay. That's
It just, I mean, you don't have to agree, but that's just what I meant. I didn't mean
no, I
all
agree.
of
I
them.
just wanted to, yeah, make that point. Thank you.
Actually, before you leave the podium there, since I personally contacted Sarah and others NGOs in order to engage them in the cost of compliance effort, both at the beginning and during the time that the stakeholder group was always intended to be open to anyone who participated. And I appreciate that given lack of resources, many of the NGOs did not participate. And the report that came out of the NPDES stakeholder group, yes, reflected those of the participants, which were the discharger community. But I personally reached out to Sarah and others to discuss those recommendations, to discuss the draft resolution that the board eventually adopted. And I, again, appreciate your lack of resources and inability to participate. So I will take what you've just said today on behalf of Sarah as a commitment from Coast Keeper Alliance to work with staff in the prioritization and fleshing out the work plan that will be brought back to the board in February.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. So do we, again, thank you for giving the update. And thank you for the collection of recommendations. I'm not clear on exactly where we are. And I'm open. I don't have strong feelings. The conversation needs to continue, and we need to make some progress, and we need to be realistic about our time. So.
Right, so I understand where we're at. What we have just heard from you is that you are looking for a draft work plan or something that looks like a work plan that has some timelines, some prioritizations, and some dates. And as I think this through, I believe a work plan also needs to define what the actual finish line is. As Mr. Link had discussed, actually getting implementation on the ground and seeing differences rather than just identifying them. So we hear from you that you're looking for something